Hey there folks, welcome to your weekly glass demo. In this video I will show you how you can use one of our larger dropout ring molds to create a custom bowl. Bonus, I will walk you through how I broke that dish and cannibalized it to make an even cooler design, in my opinion. Here are your supplies. Alright, let's get started. As with any project where we're using a mold, we first want to measure our mold. And this one in particular, we're going to need to add fiber felt too. So if you don't already have some fiber felt, you can purchase some in the studio. But this is 1/8 inch thick fiber felt. And I am tracing a ring of this fiber felt that's going to be placed between our glass and the mold. Because this is a ceramic mold, we need that cushion there because there's a difference in expansion rates between the glass and the ceramic. That's why we don't usually drape over any ceramic cups or anything like that, because they tend to grab on to that ceramic cup and then you can't get your glass off. So we don't want our nice drop bowl to get stuck on the inside of this mold. This specific drop ring I made myself in clay. If you are enrolled in clay or you like to make clay at home, you can make your own molds, but I do ask that you discuss these designs with me ahead of time, because not all molds will be successful in our glass firings schedules. There are also different dropout molds available online that you can purchase. There are ring ones as well as squares and hexagons that I've seen. You can find them on Delphi, Slumpies. You'll notice that I made this fiber felt ring just a little bit wider on the inside, particularly of the ring. And this is just to make sure that our glass won't be scraping against the edge of my ceramic ring. So you'll need 2 clear circles cut out. I used the circle cutter to create my 10.5 inch circle. And remember, we're also using gloves with all of these tools and our molds. So one circle you're just going to cut out, and then the second one we're going to try to create. I wanted a clear ring around the edge of my design and have the inside filled with scraps and my Vitrograph. Cut a circle out of a circle so we have a circular ring instead of filling that outside with scraps and frit. You can cut out a circle, a whole ring. It's tricky, and I've already done this a couple times, so don't stress if you end up with a couple different pieces. It's good to practice and try new things. But I've cut my circle, and here's a technique where I flip my glass over after I've cut it, and I press on my score marks to flex those open and make it easier for breaking the circle out of the rest of the glass. And before I break it, I cut off my extra strips so there's not too much stress, and then I can use my running pliers, my breakers, to just pop off the rest. I ended up with a couple little nubs here and there, just little pieces that did not quite break off, and I used my grozers, still not sure how to pronounce that. But here I just tried to pull it off, and it started like flaking and chipping everywhere. I looked at it a little bit more closely, and I was holding my glass upside down, so on the opposite side of the score mark. You want to make sure your score mark is facing up when you're pulling things off with the grozier. And you see it just pops off really quickly after I get it on the right side. Easy peasy. So next I'm going to line my cut circle up with my circle cutter again. I haven't moved my sliding cutter on the ruler yet, and I want to make sure I line my circle up again right in the middle of the circle cutter. That way I'm not cutting a wonky circle right? So I'm going to check and make sure that my little cutter blade lines up with just the very tip, very edge of my circle. All the way around, it was sitting on the glass just barely. So I'm checking very, very closely so I don't get an, an odd-shaped circle. Obviously, if you want an odd-shaped circle, go ahead, do that. Try that out for a whole project. You could just make tons and tons of funky circles. But for this one, I wanted it to align properly. So once I've got it all lined up, I am going to now leave my glass where it is and try my best not to nudge it. And then I'm just going to slide my ruler with my cutter 1 inch smaller. So this was a 10.5-inch circle, so I've made it a 9.5-inch mark now, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it. Now I'm going to use the same technique as before where I flip my glass over on the opposite side of the score mark. And it's easy to do this technique when you've got a translucent piece of glass. It's a lot harder usually with a opaque or opal glass, but you can still try it. But I'm flexing open my score mark to hopefully get a much cleaner cut, less likely to have flares where it'll break off in areas that I don't want it to. Alright, so I'm being very careful, I'm going all the way around, and then I'm also kind of flexing it with my fingers, so pushing back and forth from the underside to just make sure that it is pretty well separated. Now, you might be able to pop it out at this point. That's happened to me in the past, but it doesn't happen every time. So again, I'm over here, I'm lining it up on the edge of my table where my score mark is, and that's helping me flex it as well. So I want to make sure that this circle is going to come off in one piece and isn't going to try and break through my middle circle or my ring when I go to break it out. From here, if it hasn't miraculously popped out, you can use your pistol grip cutter and cut a little score mark on your ring. Alright, I don't want to cut on my center circle at all because I don't want that to break. I'd like to save that for another project later. But I'm just making sure it's flexing and I'm seeing if just that little score will open it up. And now I'm going to use my breaker, cut that little mark, or break that little mark, and now I can lift off very carefully, wedge out my circle or my ring. Alright, now I've already got my kiln paper set up here with my first circle, and I've got my ring. Now I'm just going to fill this up with all my scrap Vitrograph that I've had lying around, which you can use Vitrograph for this project, or if you want to use other scraps you've got laying around, you've got lots of different colors of frit, maybe some puddles, or little bits of projects that were not so successful. Make sure to check everything. Some of my Vitrograph here has some like little metal spalling stains on it, and I don't want to include that because I know that it'll come out with little brown spots when it fires. So make sure to clean all your stuff before it goes into fire. And I'm just cutting up my little pieces. I'm trying to make it just kind of a willy-nilly but nice and dynamic design here. So I like having these little bits of red and just all sorts of colors, heavy on the yellows here. But you will notice that there's still a lot of space, right? There's a lot of air in between all of that stuff. So that's about all the Vitrograph I really have, and I'm going to take that off and I'm going to add shock frit to fill in those air gaps. Alright, first I'm going to glue down my first layer. You just need 2 dots of glue, and then glue down my ring for the outside edge. Alright, and then I'm just going to fill the center with a layer of shock frit. You guys can use shock frit, or if you just have some chunky frit, again, you can use pieces. If you wanted to use just a single layer of clear, you can do that. That'll work just as well. but I'm going to fill it up to about the same level as, about the same height as my outer ring. Usually when we're filling stuff up with frit, we want to go a little bit higher than what we think we need because there's all that air in between. But because I'm going to cover this with my Vitrograph, this shock frit is mainly just to fill in the gaps that the Vitrograph won't. I'm just returning all my little Vitrograph pieces, trying to lay them out fairly evenly, try and get different colors facing different ways and crisscrossing over one another. Be careful not to make any section too thick. If you have a ton of Vitrograph or pieces overlapping in one spot, that's going to create a thick spot and you'll have kind of like a bulge in your glass. So to try and keep it even, I'm trying to space everything out. Here's an extra step if you want to seal it off with a little hairspray, keep everything from nudging around as it makes its way to the kiln. Just need a light layer on top, and this is a good technique for whenever you're using loose frit that isn't glued down or secured any other way. And then don't forget to label your paper for a full fuse, and we'll see how it looks when it comes out. Here's my full fused piece out of the kiln, and both sides are really cool. The side that all the Vitrograph was touching the frit, all the frit kind of ate out little bits of the color, right? Like it carved into it, which made for some really, really cool texture. So instead of firing this on the mold right side up the way it was full fused, I'm actually going to flip it over and fire it with the opposite side, the underside, facing up, because I decided I wanted that to be the inside of my bowl, the part that I would see the most. This mold will be placed on 1-inch stilts in the kiln, and you'll also need to provide a piece of kiln paper that will sit underneath where the glass will end up hitting the kiln shelf. The firing is a slump/tack fuse firing, and this is where the kiln will go up to our regular slump temperature, but then very quickly speed up to go to our tack temperature to make sure the entirety of the bottom is on the shelf and we have a flat surface so our bowl isn't rocky. That is it for this project. Tune in to part 2 where I will explain one of the steps that I included in this video that I didn't follow originally, which caused a problem in the slumping and required me to think on my toes a little bit and create something new. But you can follow the steps in this video for this project and be just fine, or tune into the next one and see what happens. Thanks for watching. See you in the studio.
Did you hand draw that?
Draw it.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, that's your little tip. Help me. Oh yeah, sorry.
Another
Drawing
hand.
thing, guys. And if it gets dry, you can add a little water.